Hey there, fellow classic comic collectors. As always, my name is Scott Harris King. Thanks for coming back to my channel to watch another video. And this time around, I wanted to do another top 50 comics in my collection. Of course, I already did the top 50 books in my collection, and people seem to really dig it. One thing that I think everyone really appreciated is that I do have a very broad collection. I collect a lot of different genres and time periods and characters, and people seem to respond to that. So, I do have about 10,000 comics in my collection. I have a lot of really cool books, I think. And so I figured, why not do another top 50? One thing that I really love about the word top whenever you're doing these lists is that it's not the best, it's not your favorite, it's not the most valuable or the most important, it's just top. It's nebulous enough so you can kind of include whatever you want. And there was one book that I really wanted to put in my top 50 last time, but I just had misplaced it and it didn't occur to me till after I'd done the video. So doing this allows me to spotlight some of my other comics that didn't quite make the first one for one reason or another. Also, it's for us here, it's day 53 of the self-isolation when I'm recording this. It'll be even later by the time this airs. And I know, it's a tough time for everyone. And for me, and I'm guessing for a lot of you, looking at my old comics and talking about my old comics and just going through them, it brings me a lot of joy, a lot of happiness and comfort. Just these are old friends. So I love to bring them out and dig them out. And hopefully you enjoy looking at them and listening to my stories about them as much as I enjoy sharing them with you. I'm going to try and do this a little bit faster than last time. No promises. I do get excited about talking about these comics. Hey, I love comics. I love talking about them. So this could go just as long as the last one. I don't know. But one thing that I want to do is, again, spotlight some stuff in my collection that maybe, you don't normally see. I love watching everyone else's collections and their top 50s to see what books they have and what books they think are their top books and why. For me, there's a lot of different factors, and one thing that I like to do is collect offbeat books. So I think you're going to see some stuff in here that you maybe haven't seen in anyone else's top 50, starting right off the bat with my number 50 book. It's Little Kids number 12, featuring Calvin. Okay, so this book isn't worth that much. If you luck into it on eBay, you can get one for $8-10 sometimes. But the trick is finding one on eBay. I did a quick look before the video. There were 2 sales recorded over the last whatever that is 90 days, and there's only 2 currently on Facebook. On eBay. One of them is an asking price. It's a CGC 9.8. They're asking $800. That might seem like a crazy amount to ask for a book that most people have never heard of, but that's one of the reasons why it is being they're asking so much. Is that this is a really obscure book for Marvel completists. It's one of the most difficult Marvels to find. I would say some of the more difficult books would actually be the next 2 issues. This series with Calvin lasted 3 issues. It's Little Kids numbers 12, 13, and 14. I've never seen 13 or 14 in person. But the other thing is, it's just a really important book. It's one of the first comics to star an African American lead character. This is coming out just a few months after Marvel debuted Luke Cage Here for Hire. And obviously, this is sort of a kid's book, and it's the first one that I'm aware of, the first kids book that stars African American characters that aimed for the younger audience. So it's culturally an important book. It's kind of a forerunner to another book that I've never found in the wild. I'm still looking for, which is Fast Willie Jackson. That was several years after this. But so yeah, again, it's not a particularly valuable book. I got this for $1 in a dollar bin. But it's very difficult to find. It's very important culturally. That's why it makes my top 50, second top 50, coming in here at number 50. If you want to mentally make your own list and put this at number 100, because I'm doing a second list, that's fine. But here it is, book number 50 on my list, Little Kids, featuring Calvin, number 12. Next up, book number 49. It is Fables number 1. This is a CGC 9.6. I submitted this book myself. I thought it was going to come back in 9.8. It didn't. Honestly, I don't really like grading things above like a 9.2. I think things get so subjective when you get up into just the amount of splitting hairs you have to do to tell the difference between a 9.6 and a 9.8. My guess is if they graded this book 10 times, it might come back a 9.8 3 of those times. I know there are people that can actually do this consistently, tell the difference between a 9.6 and a 9.8. I don't know why this didn't come back a 9.8. It's not a big deal. It's not a book I'm really planning on getting rid of. It is a book that, you know, was maybe a little bit hotter when I had it graded, which is back when around issue of probably 85 or 90 when the series was still going. The series has since ended with issue 150 and it doesn't really have the cachet that it used to have. Personally, I think they probably should have just ended the series with issue 75. The first 75 issues forms one really great story arc, and then after that it sort of meanders a little bit and kind of loses its focus. But here it is, book 49. It's my CGC 9.6 copy of Fables number 1. Next up, it is DC Superstars number 17, the first appearance of Huntress. I actually have 2 copies of this. This is the lower graded of the 2, but it was the easier one for me to find, so I grabbed this one. So just pretend it's slightly nicer. This is interesting. I actually didn't buy this because of Huntress. I'm a big Green Arrow fan, and I wanted to have the Green Arrow story in here in my collection. But the other interesting thing about this is that there's actually 2 first appearances for Huntress. There's an issue of All-Star, I think it's 69, it might be 68, but I think it's 69, that came out the same day as this, and it also has Huntress on the cover, although on that cover it's just a little like blurb, like introducing Huntress with like a little headshot, and that's actually just like a 1-page cameo, whereas this is a full story with her origin. So this is definitely the much more desirable and important book of her 2 first appearances, but it is a little unusual for a character to have legitimately have 2 first appearances since they came out the same day. Huntress is a character who has never quite gotten her due. Even though she's appeared in TV shows and in movies at this point, it's never really taken off, and none of those have really done her justice, but it's a character that has a cult following and a lot of potential. Next up, it's My Love number 1. I actually have 3 copies of this. My nicest copy is about a 7. It's one of the rare books I can say I actually overpaid for it. I am pretty frugal. I missed out on a lot of books because I just don't want to spend the money. I'm always trying to get a deal. And in this case, I did overpay a little bit for My Love. It is hard to find sort of higher grade romance books but from this time period, I think a 7 for what I paid. I should have held out for something a little bit nicer, but that's fine. That happens, and then that was part of a package deal, and I have since flipped those other books to sort of make that money back, so it turns out fine. This is one of 2 romance titles that Marvel launched in the beginning of the Bronze Age. I think this came out in 1970. It might have been 69. You know, the Marvel's big expansion in 68 is what most people are familiar with when they expanded their line of superhero books and put out a bunch of first issues. Characters got their own titles like Iron Man, Captain America, Nick Fury, Silver Surfer, and all those books in the middle of 68. But just a little bit later, there was also another big expansion, and there's a lot of titles that people don't really, you know, there's Conan is probably the one people are most familiar with, but there's My Love and Our Love Story both came out, and then there's a bunch of more obscure titles that didn't really last very long. Some kids books like Homer the Happy Ghost, and I just blanked on the name of the other one. There's another kids book from around that time. But anyway, so here's my My Love number 1. The series is, both of these romance series are really cool because they feature all the big Marvel artists like John Romita and John Buscema, Jim Steranko, and Gene Colan, and all these great artists that most Marvel fans associate with superhero books, but they're doing these great romance books. So if, check them out when you have a chance. They're really cool. Next up is the infamous Lois Lane, number 106. If you look online, just about everything that can be said about this has been said. Uh, Writer Robert Kanigher was trying to do something progressive here, and it just spectacularly backfires from a modern perspective. It's basically a take on the classic book Black Like Me, and Lois goes into this weird machine that Superman has for some reason. It turns her black for 24 hours, and then she goes out and she learns about racism. It's very heavy-handed, and just as icing on the cake, the title of it is I Am Curious Black, which is actually a play on a well-known at that time adult X-rated film called I Am Curious Yellow. So yeah, as if this wasn't just face-palmy enough to have this, just tacking on the X-rated connotations of the title is just icing on the cake. I will say that this gets all the hype. I paid $10 for this. It's mid-grade. It's probably a 5. It does have some creasing, and at the time I got it, I think that was the okay price is about right. It's definitely gotten more attention since I picked it up. But I will say a sleeper is issue 110. It's the exact same sort of thing. No one ever talks about 110, but if you read 110, the story is super bonkers, and it's a story where Lois adopts a papoose, a Native American child, and learns about the plight of the Native peoples through the heavy-handed, just cringeworthy writing of Robert Kanigher. I'm a big fan of a lot of his work, so these have a certain, kitsch factor, but wow, yeah. So if you can't get a 106, I would take a look at getting a 110. They're much cheaper and easier to get because they're sort of under the radar. Next up, it is Uncanny X-Men 129. First appearance of Kitty Pryde, first appearance of Emma Frost. When I was a kid, I was a huge fan of Kitty Pryde. She's a bit of a Mary Sue, I know, but, I was, 12 probably when I read my first X-Men comic, and so she was, at that point, like 15, 16, so she was sort of this, had one of those comic book crushes on Kitty Pryde. She was smart and cute, and but she also is like take charge and had this moral authority, and I really liked Kitty Pryde a lot. So this is a low grade copy. It's probably a 2.5, maybe a 3 at best. I got this for 50 cents at a indoor flea market. So it was one of those things where obviously as soon as I saw it, I had to pick it up. I don't collect X-Men. I've owned multiple copies of this in the past at different periods when I was collecting X-Men, and I always end up selling off my X-Men collection. So, I've had most of the, big issues from the Bronze Age of X-Men and gotten rid of them. But this is one where the price was right, and I do have a soft spot for Kitty Pryde, so this is going to stay in my collection. I don't really care about White Queen, but it is cool to have a key book that has 2 first appearances like this one. Speaking of a first appearance of an X-Men character, here's my copy of Avengers Annual 10, the first appearance of Rogue. I left the price tag on it. You can see what I paid for this back in the early 90s. This is a really high-grade copy. It's probably a 9.2, maybe a 9.4, but again, I don't like to go above 9.2. You can see that, however, it would be qualified if I got it graded because there's writing all over it. Those are some autographs. This is Chris Claremont's signature, and here is artist Michael Golden's signature. This is a book where these days I would definitely have them sign the inside, particularly because it is a high-grade key. There was a period where I was really just focused on less on the value and just sort of on my own stuff, and I think that's totally valid, and to some degree I'm still like that. But now I would sort of hedge my bets a little, still get it autographed, but have them sign on the inside. These days, I really only have creators sign the cover of lower grade books. I do really like meeting the creators and talking to them about stuff. But yeah, this is a book where I kind of wish I hadn't had them sign the cover. Or I wish I had bought like a lower grade copy to have them sign and kept this one as it is. But still, again, it's like a 9.2, and I've had it in my collection now for close to 30 years, so not a huge deal. Coming in at number 42 on my next top 50 countdown, it is Boy Comics number 7. This is one of the key issues of Boy Comics. A lot of the early issues are popular with collectors for different reasons that all have to do with the covers for the most part. There's a couple stories, issue 9 in particular. But here with issue 7, the big thing is it's got the 3 Axis leaders. It's got Tojo, Hitler, and Mussolini on the cover, and there's of course a lot of collectors that collect the war books that have Hitler covers in particular, but the 3 together, I think it would be even more sought after and valuable if the coloring was different, if they weren't all monotone like this. But again, this is sort of a key book. I got this relatively cheap because my copy is so rough. You can see along the spine's completely split, cover's detached, completely split. And the book has significant brittleness on the corners, so it's chipping away. I'll be honest, I've never even opened this. The stories are all available to read for free online because they're public domain. As a completist, I wanted this in my collection. At some point, it would be nice to upgrade it to a nicer copy. For now, I'm satisfied with this. Sometimes put it on display so I can look at the cover. The story inside is absolutely bonkers. It was one of the inspirations for when I did the first issue of my continuation of the series that I wrote and drew. The story in issue 7 was one of the big inspirations because it's absolutely berserk, the sort of thing that really shouldn't be marketed for children. But anyway, here it is, Boy Comics number 7. Next up, number 41 on my list, it's Journey into Mystery, number 87. This is a really nice copy. It's a higher mid-grade book. It's probably like a 6. Great, just bright, vibrant, blinding colors on this one. I'm trying to angle it so that it doesn't reflect too much, but I also want you to be able to get a good look at it. That was a failure. Sorry for all the glare. It's just the Mylar makes it look good. But anyway, so here's my story behind this. If you're a fan of Magic the Gathering, if you collect Magic the Gathering cards, you're going to want to close your ears or fast forward to the next book because you're not going to want to hear this one. But about 2007, I really got back into collecting. But the first thing I did is I decided to just narrow my focus a lot. I had been out of collecting things for probably 6 or maybe even closer to 10 years where I'd been a reader. I was reading comics, but I was just throwing them in the closet. I wasn't really collecting, and part of that was my collection was in storage. Well, I finally got it out, and I decided to get really back into collecting. And the first thing I did is I sold off a whole bunch of comics, traded a bunch, and got rid of probably 2/3 of my collection and just honed in on what I wanted. And one of the things I decided I really wanted to do was collect the Thor run. And as part of it, I brought into the store a bunch of comics to trade, but also I owned at that time, again, you're not going to want to hear this, the Magic the Gathering, the Collector's Edition. Now, the Collector's Edition was put out, I think, in 94. It was a gold-backed limited edition set that was reprinting the first set of Magic cards, the Unlimited set. And it wasn't tournament legal because of the gold back and the square corners, but you could play them in casual games because they were real cards, and it was the entire original set. So it had the Power 9, Black Lotus, the Moxes. So I had this collector's edition. It was limited to 10,000. I paid $100 for mine in the mid-90s. It was used. Someone had already been using it and playing with it, so it wasn't. They were just playing with the cards, not even in sleeves, so they were some of them were a little dinged up, had a little bit of wear. And so in 2007, I traded that set to the comic store. I got $650 in credit for it. So I did well, but that set has taken off significantly since then. I think the Black Lotus from that set alone is worth several multiples of the money I got. And so if I had that now, I could get a lot. I could get a Journey to Mystery 83 instead of what I did get, which was several other issues. I showed off issue 89 in my first top 50 video. I've got one more that I'll be showing later in this video. But here's my copy of 87. Is one of the several books that I got in trade for the collector's edition Magic the Gathering. And book number 41. Here we have Josie, number 34. I do have most of the key issues of Josie. I don't have Josie number 1, which these days is starting to look like it was actually the first appearance of Josie for a long time. Archie's Pals and Gals 23 has been considered the first appearance of Josie. I have a copy of that, although it's incomplete. There's a pin-up that has been cut out of it. I also have Josie and the Pussycats 45, which if I do, for some reason, the third top 50 video will probably make that list. That's the first appearance of the Pussycats. But the one that I probably like the most is actually this one here. It's got this awesome psychedelic cover. I got a really good deal on this. I found it in a $5 bin at a comic store last year, and of course I bought it immediately. This is not that easy a book to find, and when you do find it, this is a mid-grade, lower mid-grade book. Looks beautiful. It's got some structural issues. I mean, I think 10 times that is a reasonable price. I certainly wouldn't take less than 50 for it if I was going to sell it, which currently I'm not planning on doing. And it might go for a little bit more. It's just got this classic, awesome psychedelic cover that people love. So yeah, there's number 41 on my list. It's Josie, number 34. All right, here at number 40, it's Wonder Woman 179. Now, the New Look Wonder Woman era actually began with the previous issue 178. So there's a little bit of a split in the value between the two. They're both sort of up there. That one's got the cover where she's wearing this mod outfit and she's got this poster. She's crossed out the old Wonder Woman. And they're both kind of key books because it is like a two-part storyline. That issue is where things begin, but it really sort of culminates here where basically the Amazons on Paradise Island, there's something happening with the island, so they basically shunt it into this other dimension. And once it's gone, it means that Wonder Woman loses her powers because she no longer has connection to the island or whatever. It doesn't really matter. It's just an excuse to sort of revamp the character by having her lose her powers, but also removing all of the Paradise Island stuff to set the table. So it's a key story. For me, the big events really take place in this issue, but also it has this absolutely iconic cover. There was a series of covers kind of like this, like Superman 233. Same thing, same writer, Denny O'Neil, where they have this sort of explosion effect in the background to signify the beginning of a new era. The Superman one came much later than this, like a couple years later, so it's definitely sort of homaging this. Yeah, this is a nice mid-grade book. It set me back about $20 off of eBay. This was a while ago. This is several years ago. I put together a full run of Wonder Woman from 178 to 329, so from the beginning of the New Look era through the end of Crisis, and I hadn't read any of them, and then I basically sat down and read all of them at once. And for my money, the New Look era is by far the best. I know that's a controversial opinion, but yeah, significantly the best stories in the run begin here. Next up, number 39, it is Doctor Strange number 1. This is a nice mid-grade book. It's probably a 5.5 or a 6. I got this quite a while ago for $5 when I was putting together my Doctor Strange run. I was very pleased to have it. I've had copies of this in the past. I had a higher grade one a number of years ago. The first time I started collecting Doctor Strange, I ended up selling all those, but then I got back into it, blah, blah, blah. So you can see that this is autographed. It's autographed both by artist Frank Brunner and by writer Steve Englehart. I've had the great fortune to meet both of them at conventions and get their signatures. Again, these days I tend to have people sign on the interior. This being a mid-grade book, I would probably still prefer if I had had this signed inside rather than outside. Just my tastes are changing in that regard. Again, I paid $5 for this, so it wasn't as valuable when I bought it as it has become. I think I don't know exactly what it's going for now. I think nowadays, in this condition, this would probably be a $30 or $40 book, which is great because I think Doctor Strange is a really underrated title. And the Frank Brunner art in this series is just amazing. We'll be seeing some more Doctor Strange later on, in actually coming up just shortly, but then more later on in the countdown. So there's some more Doctor Strange to come. We'll also be seeing some more of these to come. It's Boy Comics number 18. Now this is for a subset of Golden Age fans. Again, the covers on the Boy Comics what draws most people in. This has this very well-known car crash cover by writer and artist Charles Biro, where this incredibly violent crash with this car, which was of course new at the time. This is a war era book. It's crashing. The guy's being thrown violently out of the car and smashing against the wall. But luckily, Crimebuster himself is vaulting to safety. Frankly, I don't remember what I paid for this. It probably wasn't all that much because I was trying to put these together on a budget. My guess is I probably paid $30 or $40 for this. This is over about 10 years ago, 11 years ago. Nowadays, I think it would be worth significantly more. There has been a pretty big uptick on some of these covers that have gotten a lot more attention over the last decade with Boy Comics. So I'm really happy to have gotten this when I did. This is a nice mid-grade copy, really nice colors, and again, just a really cool cover there. I'm just going to adjust the light here so hopefully I don't get quite as much glare on some of these. Next up, it's another Journey into Mystery. It's issue 86. I showed you 87 just a minute ago. Here's 86. Again, same story. I got this as along with 87 and 89 and a bunch of other issues of Journey into Mystery up in the one teens as part of the stuff that I got when I traded in my collector's edition. This isn't quite as nice as the other one. It's got a little bit of a tear here that goes in about an inch, maybe an inch and a quarter. And so it's probably more in the 4.5 to 5 range, but it's a tight, clean book. It looks really nice. And, it's the 4th issue of Thor. So the first 3 get all the press, of course, because they've got the first appearance of Thor, the first appearance of Odin, and the first appearance of Loki in that order. So they're all keys. This has the first appearance of Zarko the Tomorrow Man. Let's just say not quite in the same range. When I was putting together my run of Journey in the Mystery, that's basically why I stopped. I ended up just 4 issues short of the entire run. I was missing 83, 84, 85, and 94. And had the rest of the run starting here, and I ended up selling off issues 104 to 502 because I just realized I didn't love this series enough to justify the expense to complete that collection. But I did keep my big logo Journey in the Mystery issues. We'll be seeing some more later on in the countdown. Next up, as promised, some more Doctor Strange. Not that you would know it from looking at this cover, but it's Strange Tales 115. This has the origin of Doctor Strange. Now, Doctor Strange is interesting, unlike most Marvel books at the time, or most DC books even, most superhero books. When he first appeared, there was no origin. His first appearance, of course, is in issue 110, then there's a couple issues without him, and then he comes back. And when they come back with this, they finally tell his origin, and it's the absolute classic. Just fantastic work from Steve Ditko, some of his best, moodiest work. It's the same exact story, basically, that the entire first Doctor Strange movie is based on. That story's right out of this issue, Strange Tales 115. This is a lower grade, solid, like a 3.5 probably, that I got in a trade. I talked about in the first video a trade where I I found a book in a dollar bin, and I flipped it for I traded it for $450 in cash and trade, and I got a bunch of keys as part of that, including Luke Cage #1, Marvel Premiere #1, and Strange Tales 115. Those are the ones I kept. I also had in that part of that deal, I received a Amazing Spider-Man 122, and I think I had a Werewolf by Night 32 low grade. I honestly don't even remember. Plus, again, another $200 cash. So that was probably the best deal I've ever had. So I kept this one because I love Doctor Strange, and this is like sort of the early cornerstone of my Doctor Strange collection. Next up, here's a book you don't see that often. It's Omaha the Cat Dancer #1. It's not the first appearance of Omaha. That gets a little tricky to explain, but her first widely distributed published appearance was in a comic called Bizarre Sex #9. Prior to that, the character had actually appeared in like a amateur, like, I don't know if it was a fanzine or if it was like a school newspaper or something. That's almost impossible to find, although there's a few people that have copies. But so basically, Bizarre Sex #9 is considered her first appearance for all intents and purposes. This is this, I think it's their second issue, and there's multiple printings of this. You can tell it's the first printing because of the weird price of $1.60. The later printings have higher price points on them. And I'm slowly putting together a run of Omaha. For those who don't know, it is sort of a groundbreaking adult comic. It's anthropomorphic cat people who frequently get into very adult situations. It's, there's a lot of adultness in it, considering it's got cat people in it. But it's actually a really well done sort of soap opera and like adult drama that just has sort of mature content in it. So it was really groundbreaking, and as a fan of soap operas and romance comics, this is definitely adjacent to that. If it didn't have the cat people in it, it would be firmly an adult romance title. So don't let that throw you. If you're into that sort of storytelling, this is very, very good. And I have found this again in a dollar bin at like a flea market or something. And so I bought it immediately because I collect Omaha, but also I had a feeling it might be the first print, and I was very excited when I discovered that it was. Next up, it is WoW Comics #31. Now, in my first video, I showed off my really, really nice WoW Comics 38, which has this all-time classic cover of Mary Marvel flying up through the clouds. This isn't quite on the same level as that, but if you are looking for a cheaper and easier to find sort of substitute for issue 38, you might want to look at 31. It's got this excellent cover of her flying with a cool lightning bolt and erupting in these stars, where you have all the other characters in the series, like the Phantom Eagle and Mr. Scarlet and Pinky and some of the other characters from WoW Comics. I'm a big fan of Mary Marvel. I have 3 or 4 issues of WoW. I'd like to get more. I got this off of eBay a number of years ago, probably for $25, and then not that much more expensive now. You can get complete solid low grade copies of this book on eBay, and it won't set you back more than $30 to $40. This is a bit of a nicer copy, so it's probably worth $50 or $60 now. But considering the just exponential growth in value for WoW Comics 38, I think some of the other WoW Comics books with the cool Mary Marvel covers deserve a second look, and I think that there could be some sort of trickle down effect. There should be, because there's some great covers. Again, if you don't have the opportunity to get a 38 because it's become astronomically expensive, here's a really affordable substitute that the main danger of getting it is that you'll read it and fall in love, and then you'll have to start buying a bunch of other WoW issues, which is basically what happened to me. Next up is from Charlton. It's Secret Romance #1. Now, Secret Romance is one of their later romance titles. This book came out in 1968, and this series ran for, I want to say 40 some issues, 48 issues maybe. And there's a couple other issues in this run that I consider to be sort of minor keys. This is my favorite in the run. And the big reason is this just tremendous cover. Like, this is not what you normally expect to get from a romance comic, but particularly because, so my copy, if you look really close here, it's on the side here, you can see it actually has a date stamp. I love date stamps just in general. I love the provenance. I just think it's so cool as a historical artifact, but specifically with this one, the story is about a woman whose wife is killed, a woman whose husband is killed in Vietnam, and then the guy's best friend who was wounded in the same attack. Of course, the husband saved this guy's life, and now he's back, and he's sort of like brings the last message to the widow, and eventually the two of them sort of find solace in each other's company, and they end up getting married. But this book came out, the date stamp is June 12, 1968, came out right at the height of the Vietnam War. So having the date stamp on a Vietnam War romance book, I have a couple others. I have a subset of my collection that's all romance comics that deal specifically with the Vietnam War. There aren't a lot of them, but there are enough to put together a small collection of them. And this is one of my favorites. I love having the date stamp on it. It has a special meaning to me because when this comic came out, my father was in the VA hospital recovering from serious wounds that he suffered on his second tour in Vietnam, and he was still on crutches when he married my mother later this year in 1968. That's one of the big reasons I collect the Vietnam romance comics. And so, yeah, this just has a lot of personal meaning to me, but also it's just a tremendous sort of historical artifact. And again, just a tremendous cover. Just imagine, going to your corner shop to look at comics in the summer of 1968. Again, we talked about this earlier, the Marvel explosions going on. You got Captain America 100 on the stands, and you've got, Iron Man 1 and all this stuff coming out. But right in the middle of that, you get this. You get this just jolt of reality in your face. I just absolutely love it. Speaking of jolts of reality to your face, it's Boy Comics #13, which has a World War II cover where the Nazis are executing a bunch of civilians. So you see there's German soldiers. I'm trying to get this without the glare. I'm so sorry. Let me just... Yeah, there's nothing else I can do about this. There we go. There's a guy with a machine gun, and they've lined up all of these helpless civilians against the wall, and the Germans are about to machine gun them down. And Crimebuster and Squeaks have just jumped in to disrupt things. This came out at the height of the war. The extent of the war crimes from the Axis was rumored, but hadn't yet been fully realized. And so this is a book I know there's a lot of interest in this particular issue because of this cover. It was manufactured with one staple, so it's hard to find copies that are nice and intact. This is a lower grade copy. Everything is attached just barely with the one staple in the middle. It's very easy to have detached covers here. This one's still hanging on. I paid a fair amount of money for this. I think I paid $105 for this, and this was a decade ago. But I certainly don't regret it. I know people that are looking for this issue because it is an important sort of cultural artifact. #31, next up, it's Captain America #110, with this tremendously classic Steranko cover with the Hulk smashing through the wall and Captain America and Bucky. This is a nice copy. It's probably a 7, maybe a 7.5 on a good day. I got this at a store called AOK Cards and Comics in Leominster, Massachusetts. That was my hometown way back in the day. And that was the one comic store in town. And I used to go there, and I got this. It was one of the more expensive books that I bought there because they had very good prices. But even at the time, the Steranko covers were sort of breakout. But I got this, and I got an even nicer 110 that's probably an 8.0. Both of them there. And I think I paid, I want to say $10. Might have been 12. But it's an absolutely classic cover. And if you don't have these and you haven't read them, let me tell you, as great as the cover is, the Steranko art on the inside is just mind-blowing. It's some of his best work, some of the best art that ever appeared in Captain America, which is really saying something. It's great. I do have a complete run of Captain America, starting with Tales of Suspense 58 and running up through the end of this series with whatever that was, 454. And this is one of the best. All right, here we are, number 30. It is Mr. Miracle. Number 4 is the first appearance of Big Barda. This is a lower grade copy. It's probably a 2.5, maybe a 3. I paid more than I wanted to for this. I think it was $25. I just got in at a bad time. As I've mentioned before, I really like female heroines, female lead characters. It's kind of a sub-focus for me in my collection. So I'm a big fan of Big Barda. I wanted to get her first appearance, and I happened to start looking for it right after the movie announcement came out. I'm not big into speculating on movie appearances. I think that's a really good way to lose a bunch of money. But I wanted the appearance, and so I decided to grab it before the prices went up even higher. So yeah, it's a little irritating. If I had bought this a month earlier, it would have been, half the price or less. But still, I'm happy I got it. I'm not a big condition freak, so once I got this, the pressure was off. I didn't feel like I needed to spend $100 or something on a nicer copy. Here we are, number 29. It's Haunted Love, number 5. We're getting into a section of the countdown here where we have a lot of great covers, classic covers. This is one of my favorite romance books. I've mentioned this in my romance episode, I think. If you're interested in getting into romance, Haunted Love is a great place to start. They're sort of gothic romance stories. There's a horror element to all of them. It's a short series. I think it only ran for 13 issues, and most of them have just these tremendous covers. We're going to be seeing another one a little bit later in my countdown. This is one of my favorites. Let me see if I can get that in there. There's a couple kissing in front of that big portrait. I just love the effect on this. I go back and forth on whether 5 or 6 is my favorite. We're going to be seeing 6 later on in the countdown, but this is number 5. It's a nice mid-grade copy. I'm still on the lookout for like a truly high grade, but it's a very nice looking book, and I just love the cover. Speaking of classic covers, here is Nick Fury, Agent of S.H.I.E.L.D. number 6. Awesome Steranko cover, one of my favorite covers. I have a lot of favorite covers, but this is one that's always really spoken to me. This is a lower mid-grade copy, a 4.5 or 5. I think I paid $5 for it at a convention a few years ago. I'm slowly piecing together a set of the S.H.I.E.L.D. run. It's a little disappointing on the interiors because Steranko didn't really stick with the book. I think once it became a full-size series as opposed to a split book, he just couldn't keep up with the production schedule. So there's a bunch of other artists that are doing their best to draw in his style. It's just not quite the same, but he still does these amazing covers. This is an all-time classic. Speaking of all-time classic covers, I was so excited to get this. It's the Phantom number 76 with this absolutely tremendous painted cover with Phantom, the American flag, you know, the saber. It's just tremendous. One of the best Charlton covers of all time. I was so excited when I found this in a box at a show for $9. It's a high grade copy. It's probably an 8.5, maybe a 9. I think 9 might be stretching it. Um, you know, you look through these boxes of comics and you come across comics and you're like, I don't know, maybe. But then you have that great moment where you find a comic in a box and as soon as you see it, you're like, yep. So great comic at this price, no brainer, like immediate purchase. And yeah, just this is one staying in my permanent collection. Next up, it's another classic cover. It's My Love number 14. This is obviously it's a frame cover. It's from the double-sized November 1971 issues with the first frame covers. All the books from Marvel that month were double-sized. There's a big story behind it. I won't get into it, but it was one part of it was that it was celebrating the 10th anniversary of the release of Fantastic Four number 1 at the beginning of Marvel Comics. This is a mid-grade book. It's got a bit of a roll on the spine. It's got a little bit of small creasing otherwise, I think, and a few color breaking ticks along the spine. I have this at about a 5.5, creeping towards 6. I think if I had the roll pressed out, it might get up to a 7, but I don't think it's really worth it for that. This is a book in this condition. It's probably somewhere between a $50 and $70 book. It's got this Woodstock cover and story. And between the frame cover, the double size, but most importantly, this great Woodstock cover, this is one of, it's maybe the biggest Marvel Bronze Age romance key. DC does have an equivalent book. It's Heartthrobs 118. It doesn't sound right for some reason. Anyway, they have a Woodstock cover, and it gets a little bit of a premium, but not nearly as much as this one. Next up, another classic cover. It's Conan number 24, the last issue of Conan drawn by the great Barry Windsor Smith, turning in probably his best cover on the series, maybe the best cover he ever did. The great Red Sonja cover. This is not the first appearance of Red Sonja. I went over this in my first top 50 where I featured Conan 23. That's the real first appearance of Red Sonja. This is her first cover appearance. It's also a classic story and an amazing cover. I think any Red Sonja fan or Conan fan needs to have both 23 and 24. I have 2 copies of this. The other copy I have is about a 6. This is a higher grade. It's more like an 8. I got this maybe a 7.5, but between it, like in that range, 7.5 to 8. I got this recently as part of an original owner run. It's just got some scuffing along the top and the corners are a little rounded. There's a little crease down in this bottom corner. Beautiful book. Very excited to get this upgrade, and it's just such a great comic. Another classic cover, it's Captain America 113. Now this is a bit of a lower grade copy compared to my other Steranko Captain Americas. I mentioned just earlier that, you know, my 110 is about a 7.5. My 111 is probably an 8. This is more in the 6 range, but it's my favorite of the 3 covers. I've always just absolutely loved this cover. I also paid the most for this. This is the last of the 3 that I got. The price tag on it said $25. I'm not sure if I actually paid that full price for it. It's possible, and I've had it for quite a while. So this is a book that it very quickly reached its price potential and is sort of held steady more or less. So, but I've always loved this cover, so I was very excited to finally pick it up when I did, which is almost 30 years ago now. Another great cover. It's Boy Comics number 17. This is a war era book, and it's got this great war cover with a black cover. We got Crime Buster running with the American flag while the bombers are coming in at night. Mine's a lower grade copy. It's probably a 2.5. I think I would be hard pressed to go above that. It's got a little bit of paper loss here, and it's got some um, foxing, darkening along the spine. So yeah, I think for technical reasons, it's on the lower side. It is a tight, complete book, and it's just beautiful to look at. Fantastic cover, and I didn't pay too much for it at the time I got it. I was putting my Boy Comics run together. I mean, I just finished it last year, but the bulk of it I would put together in between like 2008 and 2011, and so the prices then weren't as high as they are now for something like this. One of my all-time favorite romance books. It's Young Love number 68. It's the first issue of the Life and Loves of Lisa St. Clair, who is this character here. It's an awesome cover by J. Scott Pike, who is one of the great romance artists of all time. I love yellow covers. I love the design of this. This copy is a qualified higher grade book. It's like I'd probably have it at a 7 or around a 7, except it does have a pop staple. So it's like a qualified 7. Unqualified is probably a 5. This is a book I've considered upgrading. I've had a couple chances to buy a higher grade copy. There was a CGC 9.2 a while ago that was on eBay a couple years ago for $125. I almost pulled the trigger. I kind of wish I had, because this is one of my favorites. I paid $6 for this, so it's a little bit hard to justify when this already looks so great, spending that kind of money for what's essentially a cosmetic upgrade. But we're going to see. I have a book later on where I also didn't pull the trigger on an upgrade when I had the chance, and now I really regret it. So we'll see. At some point, I might upgrade on this one. And here we are, number 21. It's Archie 115, another classic cover. This is a cover that's been breaking out over the last 5 years or so. It's in general, the covers by Harry Lucy are really starting to pick up over the last 5 to 10 years. I say 5 years in particular. The big Harry Lucy covers are Betty and Veronica 40 and 41, and to a lesser degree, a book that really should be worth a lot more than it is Life with Archie number 2. Those are sort of the big covers, but there's a couple that have really started taking off recently. This is one of them. We've got another one later in my countdown that I'll be showing. This is one of his classic Betty covers. It's like a Betty spotlight. The other one I'll be showing later is another Harry Lucy, but that one's a Veronica spotlight. Besides having the great image of Betty on here, the other thing that's interesting and notable about this book is the pink color scheme. For the first 25, close to 30 years of Archie as a series, the color scheme was always red and blue, and they would alternate issues. So it would be like red background, blue logo, blue background, red logo. This is like the only issue in the first, 170, 180 issues of Archie that goes against that color scheme, where they go with the pink background. It really makes this issue pop out, especially when you have it with the rest of the Archie run. So I was really happy to get this recently. I paid not too much for it, I think $20, and it's a lower grade copy, but I was really happy as a completist. Getting this and the other one that I'll show you momentarily checked off my Archie list was a big win, because they're starting to get up there in price, and I wanted to get them at an affordable price before they go completely crazy. It's coming. Across the board, the Lucy covers from this era are starting to pick up, particularly because books from this period, late 50s, very early 60s, This is still a 10-cent book. So if you've got these 10-cent Archies with the Lucy covers from this period, they're really picking up. And a lot of them are starting to break out. And it's just a matter of time. And this is one of the big ones. All right, here we are, top 20. And here at number 20, it is Boy Comics number 4. Yep, it's another one from my run of Boy Comics. This is actually the second issue. The series began with number 3. It picked up its numbering from a previous title. And this was the last issue of Boy Comics that I needed to complete my run. The series ran for 117 issues up through 119. This was the last one I needed. It's a low grade copy. It's probably a 2.5. There's a lot of splitting and damage on the spine. It's also incomplete. Most copies of this book are incomplete. The centerfold for this book was a board game called something like The Road to Berlin, and kids were encouraged to pull it out and use it as a board game to basically play the Allied troops advancing into Germany. So most copies are missing the centerfold, including this one. This is a big book for collectors because in addition to that centerfold that's so hard to find, it's got, again, the Axis powers here, Hitler, Mussolini, and Tojo, this time in full color with the heroes of the comic led by Crimebuster smashing through the window to take them out. This was a book, even in this condition, incomplete and damaged like this, it still cost me over $100. So not a easy book to find, not a cheap book, but I was very, very excited to get this and finally complete my run. So number 19, it is Astonishing Tales number 25, the first appearance of Deathlock. I'm a huge Deathlock fan. Told the story a few times, but when I was a kid, I'd just gotten into collecting comics. In the mid 80s, a guy that worked with my dad, I ended up acquiring 3 long boxes plus of his comic collection, which was all Bronze Age stuff from between 73 and 76, included a bunch of issues of Astonishing Tales with Deathlock. Loved the character. Really unfortunate that they didn't end up doing more stuff. I wish his series had continued because it was really cool. I've owned multiple copies of this over the years. This is my current copy in my collection. It's a nice copy, not high grade. It's got some creases going here, and it's got some down along the bottom edge. So this is probably a 6 at best. I think I paid $12.50 for it. I do have a second copy that I got at a flea market for $2. That one has some marker on the cover. So at present, I don't feel the need to upgrade it. But I love it. I love the cover. I love yellow covers in general. So yeah, this is a book that won't be leaving my collection anytime soon. Number 18, it is Marvel Premiere number 3, featuring Doctor Strange. I've had this book for a long time, since before I really got into Doctor Strange. I had mentioned this in my previous top 50 video. At one point, I was sort of doing a little bit of mild speculation on some things. I had a really high grade Doctor Strange 169 at that point. I got this at the same time. I paid like $2 or $3 for it. It's a really high grade. It's probably a 9. It's got this fantastic black frame cover. It's super glossy. The art in this is from Barry Smith, and I think this is a really underrated book. You know, Doctor Strange is a series where he's had several titles, so figuring out the keys, the first issues and stuff can be a little difficult. This sort of falls a little bit in the cracks, I think. 169's gotten a lot of love over the last several years, particularly with a run-up into the movie. And then Doctor Strange number 1, when his next series started. This, though, was the first issue of Doctor Strange in Marvel Premiere. It led to that Doctor Strange number 1, which I showed earlier. Started with issue 3 and ran through issue 14, and then the sales on this book and the success of this series led to them giving Doctor Strange his own title. So for me, this is a more important book than Doctor Strange number 1. and I have this super awesome high grade copy. I've always felt this is a really underrated book with the Barry Smith art and just the importance to the character finally getting his own series back after several years. But it's kind of fallen in the cracks a little. Hopefully that'll change at some point. I mentioned this book earlier. Here it is. It's Haunted Love #6. I'm going to bring this in close so you can get a good look at this just bonkers psychedelic cover with this incredible artwork. This series just has some great covers, some great art. Charlton in general has a lot of really underrated covers and artists. And this is a book I bought on eBay a couple years ago. I think I paid $20 for it. It's advertised as an 8.0. I actually think it's a little bit higher. It's more like a 9. It's just in tremendous shape, beautiful colors, and just the cover, the art on this. Again, I'm trying to give you a really good look at it, nice up and close. It's just so cool. It's so great. Up next, Sergeant Fury and his Howling Commandos #13. Now, I sort of have a complete run of Sergeant Fury. I say sort of because starting with around issue 80, the book went to where a really weird thing they were doing where every other issue was a reprint. So I have all of the new stories for Sergeant Fury up until the book went to reprint full time with issue 121. So I have Sergeant Fury 1 through 120, but I am missing some of the reprint issues. I'm slowly working on tracking them down just because I want the letter column inside, basically. And just because having those numbers on my checklist is irritating. But this is one of the first ones that I got, and it was really part of my Captain America collection at the time. This was a book when I first got back into collecting comics. I've mentioned this before. In 2007 or so, I did this big purge where I got rid of a bunch of my stuff. I mentioned this when I was talking about those Journey to Mysteries. I had a big collection of X-Men at the time, and I took a bunch of those to a show, and I traded them for different things. In my first video, I mentioned I traded a really high-grade copy of X-Men 101 for my copy of Tales of Suspense 57. Similarly, I traded a really high-grade copy of X-Men 95 for this and a bunch of other random comics. The dealer actually didn't want to do the trade because this is lower grade. It's got a lot of, it looks beautiful, but it's got a lot of tanning, like quite severe tanning on the cover. So it's technically only probably a 4, maybe a 3.5 as a result. And so he knew that he was getting the better end of that deal because my X-Men 95 was probably a 9.0. So but at that point I didn't really care about that. I just wanted to get the keys that I wanted to get, and this is a book I'd always wanted. So basically we worked out that he was going to throw in a bunch of other books. So I picked up a number of other just filler comics to read and stuff that I wanted for my collection. I'm really happy to have it, and it's just a great Kirby Captain America cover from the Silver Age of Marvel Comics. Here we have Foom #17. I've got quite a few issues of Foom, and I love comics. I love comics history. I love reading this material from the time period. It's a really interesting historical slice of life. You could see what was going on behind the scenes at Marvel in the 1970s. And so I picked up about a little less than half of the run of Foom pretty cheap. There's not an easy title to find in the wild, and so that's about as far as I got before prices really started going crazy on Foom as people sort of caught up to it. Some of the really interesting content. In this case, the Stan Lee cover since his passing has really taken off. I paid $3 for this a few years ago, and now it regularly sells on eBay for $50 plus. So you'll be hard pressed to find a decent copy for under $50 now. So it's a book that I'm really happy to have in my collection. There's a couple others I really wanted to get that I missed the boat on. Foom #1 has another Stan Lee cover. and I was never able to find a copy of that. Fu number 2 is really taken off because there's some nonsense about Wolverine in it. That has a great Steranko Hulk cover that I really wanted. So Foom is it's no longer really under the radar, but some of the stuff inside is really great. A lot of cool artwork and story articles. There's a great article in one of the issues about the bullpen where a guy goes around and interviews all the different Marvel writers about what they're working on at the time. That is just absolutely amazing. So if you have a chance to pick up any of these Foom issues cheap, I definitely recommend doing it. All right, we're getting down there. We're getting into the high picks. Here we are. It's Journey into Mystery number 103. It's the last big logo Journey into Mystery issue. More importantly, though, as you can see, it's the first appearance of the Enchantress and the Executioner. I love the cover. I love the rainbow, the big red banner at the top. It's just really great. This is I paid $20 for this. Well, I got this as part of the trade with all these Journey into Mystery issues when I traded in my Magic the Gathering cards. But it was priced at $20. It's got a bit of a spine split right down here in the bottom. So I would probably have this at 3.5, I think is about as high as I could go. It looks beautiful. The spine's got, wear. So it's a really solid lower grade book that presents beautifully. And it's just a really cool and important book to have. Here is a really high grade copy of Jonah Hex number 1. I haven't looked at this in a while, but this is probably, I hate to, as I mentioned, I don't like grading above like a 9.2, but I think it's higher than that. And that's kind of amazing because I bought it for $1.50 from this comic store I've mentioned before in Worcester, where they just, back in the 80s, they just had all these cardboard boxes that they like dragged out of the trash, and they stuffed their comics into these, as many as they could jam into them. So a lot of those back issues got kind of bent just because of the way they're being stored. But somehow this was in there for $1.50. I have really high grade copies of 2 and 3 that I got as part of that collection from my dad's work associate. So I had those already, but for some reason he was missing issue 1. I got this pretty early on in my Jonah Hex collecting. This would have been probably around 1988. And it stayed in my collection ever since. I've thought about getting it graded, but, there's not really any purpose to it. I'm a huge fan of Jonah Hex, and so I'm really happy to have this high grade copy of issue 1. Book number 12 on my list, it's Ghost Rider number 1. Put together a full run of Ghost Rider around 1990 or so, late 80s, early 90s, right around the time that the new Ghost Rider series came out. So I think that was 90. And this is an interesting book. It's really high grade, except it has 3 like pinholes in the logo up here and up in the top. Right up here. It's almost like someone put a staple through it and then carefully took the staple back out. So it's got a couple of holes that makes it really hard to grade. I think without the staple holes, this is probably an 8.5 or a 9. It's close to a 9 without the holes. With the holes, I don't know, maybe a 6. I hate to go below a 6 because it's so beautiful. It's kind of a matter of opinion, I think. I actually tried to sell this at one point a long time ago when I was thinking about just sort of getting rid of my Ghost Rider collection, and the people at the comic store wouldn't take it because it was so hard to give it a grade. I have a complete run of Ghost Rider from that period, and it's Ghost Rider number 1. Finally, number 11, book 11 on the countdown. It's Journey into Mystery 102. I just showed you 103. Here's 102. Now, 103 definitely has the better cover. We got another appearance of the Tomorrow Man. just like on issue 86, Zarko just keeps showing up to just sort of basically photobomb these key issues. Get off the cover, Zarko. No one cares about you. What people actually care about here is the backup story. And this issue has the first appearance of Hela. It also has the first appearance of Sif. So it's a double key. Sif, it's a flashback to when Sif and Thor were basically teenagers, whatever that even means in terms of being Asgardian. So she just has golden hair, like in the backup story, as she did in the original mythology. She doesn't have the black hair that we associate with Sif now, but this is I'm a big fan again of um, female heroes, just like Big Barda. I would wanted to have the first appearance of Sif. I was collecting Thor anyway, but when I sold off my Journey in the Mystery collection, one of the reasons I decided to sell off 104 and up and keep the issues before that is because it just seemed like a natural cutoff point with the large logo, but also with 103 and 102 both being keys that I wanted to keep. It just made sense to make the cutoff there. So here's 102, first appearance of Hela, first appearance of Sif. Now we're here in the top 10. I hope you're ready for this. I've got some cool books coming up. Starting with this here, it is CGC 8.5 copy of Doorway to Nightmare, #1. This is the first appearance of Madame Xanadu. It's interesting, the CGC note on it says Madame Xanadu begins. Not exactly sure why they phrased it like that. It's the first appearance of Madame Xanadu. Now, the character was inspired by a previous character who was a host for DC's horror books. I think it was Forbidden Mansion. And that character didn't have a name. And my understanding is that basically they went to Kaluta and asked him to design a character sort of based on that figure, and they came up with Madame Xanadu. That character later appeared in James Robinson's Starman series in the 90s and was given the name Charity. So they're different characters. This is the first appearance of Madame Xanadu. They were intended to be different characters. And so again, I'm not sure why CGC has that label note. So my story with this comic is that this is a rare instance where the only time I've ever done this, I went on to one of the big auction houses. Again, I've been on part of my subset is collecting the first appearance of the female characters that I'm a fan of. And I was like, you know what? I'm going to do it. I'm going to buy a CGC 9.8 of the first appearance of Madame Xanadu before it's like ridiculously expensive. And it was still very expensive. I bought one. It was $325. They sent it to me. I got it. I was excited. I opened it up. And the comic was wrinkled. The whole thing, side to side, totally wrinkled, and then there was also a horizontal right in the middle. The whole book, I think what happened was it was very cold when it was sent, and something about it being inside the case or whatever, it basically I think it like stuck to the front of the case and then shrunk with the temperature or something. I don't know, but it was a wreck. And having just paid $325 for this because it's supposed to be the nicest condition copy in existence, it was one of 12 copies that were CGC 9.8, to get it and have it just be a complete disaster. It looked like a 4.5. I was really upset. I ended up going back and forth with the auction house for a while, and they allowed me to return it. And so instead I went on eBay and I bought this for $26. And so I sort of learned my lesson there. It's like, do I need to pay 13 times as much to upgrade from an 8.5 to a 9.8? The differences are minor. There's basically at the top staple here, there's two, there's like a pull on the staple. So there's two spine ticks at the staple. On the back, on the bottom edge, there's a tiny bit of paper missing, like a little bit of chew. And that's it. It also looks like it's been pressed, so the back cover, the top edge of the back cover sticks up, which is whatever. So that's it. That's what's keeping this from being a 9.8. There's 2 spine ticks and a little bit of paper loss on the bottom of the back edge. And the difference with that is between $26 and $325. So yeah, I'm happy with my 8.5. If I have a chance to upgrade at an affordable price, then I might do that. But for now, I'm happy with this. Here we are, book number 9. It is Secret Hearts #1. This is one of the 7 big DC romance titles, but DC purchased some of those titles, inherited them from other publishers. Like they got Young Romance and Young Love, Heartthrobs, for instance, are all from different publishers. So this is one of DC's in-house #1 issues, Secret Hearts #1. I got this for $40 about 2 years ago. It's a lower grade book, it's 2.5, maybe a 3. But for the price, very happy to do that. So I have 2 of the first issues of the big 7 DC books, because I also, in my previous video, I showed off my Girls Romances #1. So yeah, I'm getting there. We are book number 8. It is X-Men #9. Again, this is one of the books that I got when I really got back into collecting in 2007. I sold off a bunch of books and I took the money from that and I bought some key issues that I had never picked up. And as a huge Avengers fan, this first crossover here with X-Men and X-Men #9 was a big one that I had never had. So I think I paid $56 for this. It's a really nice copy. It was advertised as a 6, and I think it's a little bit higher. I think it's more like a 6.5, maybe even a 7. It does have a little bit of writing here, but I believe that is like an arrival code. So it's in an annoying place because it's right in the middle of the yellow X, so it kind of jumps out. But I don't think it really affects the grade on a book like this. If it was, above a 9 maybe. But so I'm really happy to have this. It's a classic Avengers appearance, and again, it was one of these first books, along with some of the other ones that I've showed. Like in my last video, I had my Green Lantern, Green Arrow 76. This was in that same batch. We got a twofer coming up here. First, it's Wonder Woman number 200, and then it's Wonder Woman number 199. So these are 2 classic Wonder Woman covers. I'll try and angle those so you don't get as much glare. There's 200 and 199 by the great Jeff Jones, aka Catherine Jones, who did only a handful of comic book covers, but they're all amazing. I go back and forth on which I like better. Right now, I'm going with the 199. That could change. So I thought it would make sense to show these together. I got these at the same time. I got them both off of eBay a number of years ago when I was putting together my Wonder Woman collection. And just a couple of great covers. There's a lot of really underrated books in Wonder Woman from this period, but these I think have justly been celebrated for a long time because they have such tremendous covers. There's also, of course, a subset of bondage collectors who are really into these. In particular, I think the 199, but the 200 as well is another bondage cover. It's something they started to do with Wonder Woman during this time period, as they brought back the bondage covers. And these are just tremendous. The art from Catherine Jones is just fantastic. All right, now we're getting down to the top 5 books of the countdown. Here we are, number 5, as promised. It's Archie number 101. I talked about this earlier when I was showing off my 115. This is a Harry Lucy cover. This is his Veronica Spotlight cover. This is a book that's been getting a lot of heat over the last few years. This is a lower grade copy. It's got a big dust shadow here. It's got some chipping. It's got even a little bit of pen on it up here and a crease. So I still think it's probably it's a solid type book. So I have it at least a 3.5, might be pushing it. I paid, I think, a little over $20 for this just a few months ago off eBay. I was very happy to get it because I am a completist. I'm trying to put together a full run of Archie I'm treating issue 50 as my issue 1, so that's the big one I'm trying to get. I'm trying to get issue Archie 50 and above. And the big stumbling blocks, really, there's some early keys like 50, 53. I've been seeing some heat with like 78, but 101, 115 are kind of big ones. And again, the Lucy artwork is really taking off, and this is kind of a book that maybe 10 years ago hadn't broken out at all. 5 years ago is starting to get a little bit of buzz. I think 5 years from now, this is going to be up there in the stone lock key issues. I think 115 is on its way as well. So 93 is getting some buzz as well. I have a 93. It's really trashed. So maybe if I do a third one of these videos, I might show that off. But yeah, here it is. Great Lucy cover, 10-cent era Veronica cover. It's a must-have for Lucy, Archie, or Veronica fans. Book number 4. Okay, this is not a book that really is on anybody's radar. This is a strictly personal choice. Some of these are. It's National Comics number 57. I happened to randomly see this at a show last summer. It was $35, and it was a book where as soon as I saw it, I had to get it. And that's because this is the first appearance of one of my favorite Golden Age characters that nobody else in the entire universe has ever heard of, named Granny Gumshoe. Granny Gumshoe, just as the name sounds like, she's an old woman who's also an amateur detective. And her stories are sort of humorous, but they have this sort of dark, twisted vibe to them that is just like, when I read her first appearance in this online prior to getting this, I just fell in love with the character immediately, to the point where I'm bringing her back in my self-published comics. I've got a couple Granny Gumshoe stories that I'm working on right now, and I'm taking a lot of the elements from her first appearance here in particular, but some of her other stories that are kind of these twisted little bits of humor, and because I kind of see her as sort of like a cross between Mary Poppins and the Michael Fleischer's and Jim Aparo Spectre series from the 70s. That's kind of what she's like in my mind. So I just love Granny Gumshoe. I know most of you have never heard of the character. I strongly recommend that you go on to one of these public domain sites and read her first appearance here in issue 57. There's a couple other cool stories later on. I haven't even read all of them yet. I'm sort of doling them out one at a time. When I really need a pick-me-up, I'll read a new Granny Gumshoe story. Her series ran from issue 57 through issue 71, and she left the book just before the book ended. The series ended with issue 75, so at the end I think they were trying to mix things up in a desperation attempt to save the book. The Barker was the main character, the Carnival Barker, who's also kind of like a hero of some kind. So he gets all the covers, which is too bad because, like, who cares about that dude? But yeah, Granny Gumshoe first appearance. Here's a book I was way ahead of the curve on. I mentioned this in passing earlier, and I'll get into this story here. It's Justice League of America 75. This is my number 3 book. I love this book. I've been banging the drum for this book since, probably for close to 15 years. And it's just in the last little while that people have started to agree with me and has taken off. The only downside for me is that I never did upgrade this book. My copy is a mid-grade book. It's probably a 4.5. I'd like to call it a 5, and if it didn't have a black cover, I think it could pass for a 5. It's just because it has so many spine ticks that really jump out with the black cover. It's just a frustrating thing. It's one of the reasons why this is so hard to find in high grade. I did have a chance to get a high grade copy once off of eBay, and it was probably 10 years ago now, and it was $120 for a CGC 9.2. At the time, I was holding out. I wanted to get something higher grade because it wasn't on anyone's radar as an important book. I thought I could get something a little bit nicer for that amount, and the answer was no. I've never had that opportunity again. I really kick myself over it because that's a book that's worth a lot more now. For those who don't know, there's a lot of things going on with this book that make it a super key that's been under the radar. First of all, it has this black cover with a classic cover, the Black Canary with her fishnets, having just defeated the Justice League of America. It's just a great, great cover. And with the black cover, it makes it really hard to find in high grade. What's more important, though, is what happens inside, because this is essentially the first appearance of the Silver Age Black Canary. Now, of course, being DC with their multiple Earths, they had to really make things super confusing. So in this story, it's technically the Earth 2 Black Canary, the Golden Age Black Canary, and what happens in the storyline is at the end of the last issue, her husband was killed, Larry Lance, and so she decides to make a new life for herself by coming to Earth 1 with the Justice League of America, switching Earths and starting over and joining the Justice League of America. But they basically treat her as an all-new character, and later retcons actually turned her into an all-new character because the difference from this issue to previous issue is so dramatic that it's just obviously a new character. Basically, when she comes to Earth 1 in this story, the original Black Canary didn't have any powers. This is the first issue where she has her canary cry. It's the first issue where she's a member of the Justice League of America. It's the first issue where she's on Earth 1. It's also the issue where her romance with Green Arrow begins. Now, Green Arrow appears in this with the new look Green Arrow, where he has what we think of as the classic Green Arrow costume, the Robin Hood and the goatee. He had just had that revamp by Neal Adams in Brave and the Bold 85 between issues of Justice League. So in Justice League 74, we get the Golden Age Black Canary and basically the Golden Age Green Arrow, who had been appearing, as Green Arrow in Justice League since issue 4. When we jump to the next issue, 75, we have basically the Silver Age Black Canary with her canary cry and everything we identify with the Black Canary, including her relationship with the new Silver Age Green Arrow. All of that's established in this issue. And again, later it was retcon many years later, and it's really convoluted and unfortunate storyline, basically, that this actually is the daughter of the Golden Age Black Canary, and there was this thing with this weird memory wipe where she thought she was her own mother, which gets a little bit weird because she's mourning the death of her husband, who's actually her father. So the less about that, the better. But yeah, so this was later retconned into the official first appearance of the Black Canary. So, but the important thing is, other than the costume, everything we identify with Black Canary as a character, it starts in this issue. And so I've always thought this is a major key. And if it had been Marvel, it would be a major key because they wouldn't have done all this weird alternate universe. Oh, it's a different, it's the same person that they did over at DC. They would have just introduced a new version of the character, and this book would have been worth significantly more. It would still be worth significantly more even than it is now. This book has really taken off recently. It's much more expensive. I paid $4 for this. In this condition now, I think it probably cost me $75. So it's not under the radar anymore, but I think it's still undervalued when you compare it to things like, say, the first appearance of Barbara Gordon, Batgirl. I love Batgirl, and I love Detective 359. It's a book I really want to have. But Black Canary is a more important character than Batgirl, in my opinion. And so this is a book that I think should be worth significant, still worth significant multipliers more than it is. Just love, 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 love this comic. As a fan of Black Canary and Green Arrow, it's an absolute must-have. Book number 2, speaking of things I was ahead of the curve on, it's All-American Men of War number 89. Now, I do have 4 copies of this. I think this is about the nicest I have. It's only a 4.5. I'm doing an entire video about not just this book, but others like it, because the reason this book is so important is that it's one of the books that Roy Lichtenstein used as his inspiration, meaning he directly copied panels from this. But it's a little bit different than most of the other ones. There's some very expensive ones. Again, I'm doing a whole video where I'm ranting about Roy Lichtenstein and talking about the comics that he stole from. But what's different about this one than all of the others, first of all, it's the only one I'm aware of, and I could not, it's possible there's things I'm not aware of. It's the only one I'm aware of where a work of Lichtenstein's, the basis for it is actually on the cover, and that's this image here. He did a print that's like a pencil drawing that's an exact duplicate of this panel. But more importantly, most of the Lichtenstein comics were the sources of one painting, or possibly 2 paintings. In addition to this drawing, this comic is the direct source of 5 different Roy Lichtenstein paintings, including Wham, which some critics consider to be his most important work. It's certainly his most important war work. That is direct ripoff from a panel in here by Irv Novick. Russ Heath is also ripped off several panels in here. So this comic is the source of no fewer than 6 Lichtenstein works. It's the only one I know of where it's on the cover. And I've been beating the drum for this for over a decade as well, and it's definitely picked up significantly. I didn't pay more than, I think, $7 or $8 for any of my copies of this, and I do have 4 copies, and right now I think you'd be hard-pressed online to find a copy for less than $40 or $50 in any condition. I still think it's significantly undervalued, particularly when you look at the value of some of the other Lichtenstein comics, but I'll get into all that in my other video. Keep an eye out for that. I'll have that out shortly. And finally, number 1 on my list. This is the book that I meant to include in my first list, but I unfortunately had misplaced it and it just slipped my mind. But it's a super important book to me personally. It's my copy of Groo the Wanderer number 1. Now, this is the 2nd volume of Groo the Wanderer. He previously had a series at Pacific, I think it was. And I do have some of that run. But this is his 2nd number 1. It came out in 1985. It's cover dated March 85, so it may have actually been on the stands in December of 84. And this is really important to me for a few reasons. First of all, you can see that it's really beat up. It's probably a 2.5 or so. That's because this is the copy that I bought off of the spinner rack. Literally a spinner rack. This is, again, it would have been the end of 84. I don't have very many of my original comics that I bought when I first started collecting comics in 1984. This is one of the few that I still have, and one of the reasons that I've always held on to it when I've gotten rid of so many of my other books is it has a lot of personal meaning to me. I've talked about my dad in some of these videos. My dad is someone who read comics when he was younger. In the 60s in particular, he was reading Marvels when they were first coming out when he was in high school, and he was reading Marvels when he was in Vietnam. And so he always encouraged my comic book collecting. He didn't really read many except for this. I thought he would like this, and he read it and he thought it was really funny. And so I continued to collect Groo for the entire run. It ran for 120 issues. I bought all 120 of them brand new as they came out, and the ritual was every time I would finish reading a new issue of Groo, I'd pass it to my dad and he would read it. So for me, it has a huge amount of emotional importance to me. especially since my father passed away last year. It just brings back a lot of great memories of my dad's, supporting my comic collecting. As you can see, I've also had it autographed over the years. I first had it signed by Stan Sakai. He was the first member of the creative team that I had a chance to meet, and then I later was lucky enough to meet Sergio Aragonés, and he also remarked and drew um, a little sketch of Gru on the cover for me. I had a chance to tell him how important this book was to me. I still have not had a chance to meet Mark Evanier, which is something I really, really want to do. He's probably the number one creator I haven't met that I would really want to meet, because in addition to doing this, he also wrote the first comic book I ever read, which is Black Hawk 269, the book that made me a comic book creator's fan, reader, collector all at once. As soon as I read that, I knew what I wanted to do. So I owe a huge debt to Mark Evanier. I hope to meet him someday. All of those are some of the reasons why this Gru #1 is one of the most important books in my collection. It really should have been in my top 10 in my first video, but because I actually had it on display in another room, it wasn't with my comic collection. It's just something that means a lot to me, so I had it on display in the living room. I just blanked on it when I was putting together that collection. So here it is, my #1 this time around, and one of my probably top 5 comics in my collection. It's my ragged and tattered personal copy of Gru #1, which I bought off the stands. So thanks so much for watching. I know I said I was going to keep this short, and instead it went like incredibly long. I just sort of have this mouth diarrhea when I start talking about comics I love. I just can't stop talking about the comics. So hopefully my voice hasn't put you to sleep just yet. Thanks so much for watching. If you like this video, let me know. I do have 10,000 plus comics, so I've got a lot more stuff. I have a lot of videos that I'm in the process of doing, including that Roy Lichtenstein video that'll be coming out shortly, and a lot of other things planned going forward in the future. Let me know in the comments what you liked, what you didn't like, which back issues you like, so I'll have a sense of what other stuff to talk about and focus on. And there's a like button, a bell button, a subscribe, doohickey. There's some other videos you can watch, and thanks so much. And next time, I swear I'm gonna keep this more concise. I promise.